Hello everybody, welcome back to another video. Before we start, I want to let you guys know that this video is a continuation of my previous video where I was looking at the feedback sessions covering the first half of my masterclass course with Gabriel Quinn. If you want to learn more about the course, check out my sketchbook tours that I did where I was showcasing the research and planning sketches I did for the class. Now that we know that, let's take a look at what I turned in for this week's assignment. For this assignment, we had to adapt the same story as a short comic, a series of 3 illustrations, and as a storyboard sequence. I started by drafting my storyboards and creating comic panels from said storyboards. Penciling out my comic panels was so much fun to do and really challenged my compositioning, visual storytelling, and drawing stamina. It was definitely an awakening moment within my art journey and sparked a deep passion for comic creation. For the 3 illustrations, I wanted to experiment with a process where I painted the background with gouache paint and went over it digitally to add some lighting effects and paint in the characters. I was really inspired by the look of Ghibli films and how simple yet impactful they are. And now that we saw my assignments, let's see what Gabriel had to say about it.
So, sequence 1, we have, looks like a daydream for this character. Then they wake up, they snap out of the daydream, and they see something, which is a little butterfly. Looks like the butterfly is outside of a window. So the butterfly is fluttering around, flying around. The character slowly gets up and starts to walk towards the window. And then they continue outside. So it's like a really long shot of them then walking into the kind of brush. So a cool creative transition from this scene of them being more inside, getting up and walking outside and walking into the brush. Like that's all like a oneer basically, which is cool. Then we transition through the brush into a closer shot where the character is following the butterfly. That's a fun sequence, a very action-based sequence. So we're going from something very like silhouette-based to something very like dynamic and dreamlike. So it's almost like they're transitioning into like a dreamlike world. And then as they go and they follow the butterfly, they're walking over and wow, that's a funny expression. This is potentially a little pushed, but I like it. They find a magical door and the butterfly kind of leads them towards that door. And as they walk over to the door, the butterfly kind of slips through. As they walk, it bursts open and then, wow, big shot, kind of more of like a bashful expression here as we have a moment where this like male character is reaching out, inviting this character into a new world. So this is kind of like the inciting incident of a fun story. And it's a cool tie-in because in the beginning, there was this kind of like maybe this sort of romance daydream or something kind of happening. And it looks like that dream's maybe going to come true. I think the only thing this could be missing is maybe a shot of the male character reaching out. You know, you have some really dynamic shots in this middle sequence of the character running towards the butterfly, and they're kind of like, it's kind of a wide angle. I think if you did an angle kind of like that for the guy appearing through the doorway and reaching out his hand, I think that would be a fun shot for sure to end on. I think if you're going to do a 50-50 shot for this, I would go directly head on rather than kind of looking a little bit down, because you're looking like a little bit down. I would do it directly head on, and I might even like punch in a little bit closer. Like if I were to do something like this, I would try something where you're closer to the female character maybe, and then the character is like reaching out with their hand or something. If you wanted that like intimate character interaction moment, you may just want to punch in a little bit closer so you can get a bit more of that like drama. So that would be the only thing I would do. But again, I think this is really, really great. Yeah, I think like a 50-50 could be good after they lift her up and they're looking at each other. It could be good. But yeah, I think maybe a better shot here would have been to end on as this guy kind of opening the door, like inviting her to the new world. In terms of panel efficiency and stuff, for things like this where you have the butterfly flying towards the door, instead of spending like 6 pages or 7 pages on it, like one thing you could try is just doing the 1 page here and showing a line of action, like doing a sort of flow line can kind of tell you that it came from the foreground and it went to the background. So maybe you only need 2 shots, like the one where it's close and the one where it's far. Having multiple panels to add a sense of like pause or length can be really powerful, but you just want to be careful not to go too overboard with it. This one's good because you're showing the gradual movement, which is nice, and the gradual movement of the camera as they transition and kind of go into the forest. So that feels good. Yeah. This is great work, CJ. I think I really like the idea, the vibe, the rhythm, the flow. I think you're exploring in a great way. But yeah, I think like some of the excessive panels could maybe be consolidated. Like even this one, I think could be 2 panels, and the hand reaching out, I think could be 1 panel. I think the exploding door, the door flying open, you could have done a shot where it's more of one of these shots where the door is here and you can show the light streaming through and it blinding the character, and maybe the character's just silhouetted kind of falling back. And then you go to the next stage of her kind of closing her eyes, opening them, and in the doorway is this magical guy. And the last shot could be her like disappearing through the door from a distance, like one of these shots, like she's disappearing here. So yeah, some things you could try there for sure. But overall, I really like how you're vibing through it. So let's see your 3 illustrations. Yeah, so this one's feeling fun. I like the whole intense perspective, like 2 worlds element, where she coming from somewhere and you're doing the nice 2-point flowing into another channel. It's cool to see that that's like a composition that you like doing and that you're kind of figuring out and getting to be kind of strong in your compositional repertoire, which is nice. The foreshortening is looking good overall. I think the hand in the foreground, I think the foreshortening is a little inaccurate just in terms of the technical drawing. Like if we were to track the size of this here versus like the size of the hand here, like it's pretty much double the size of the hand in the background. So if that were the case, then this arm coming forward would be even bigger. Like it would be a bigger thing, you know, overall, because it's like coming forward so much. And then you would see some overlap here for the foreshortening. I think that it's possible that you could just maybe reduce the size of the hand a little bit. So if you just came up and foreshortened maybe a little bit less, maybe if the hand was going up to touch the butterfly, that could feel a little bit more in the realm of possibility. So yeah, if I flip canvas, you can probably see how extreme the foreshortening is, and it's just like a little bit inaccurate. It's just not 100% there. But again, that skill comes with time and it'll continue to refine and develop. And value-wise, dude, I think your values are improving a lot. Like I'm seeing some great control here, as well as the butterfly framing against the light of the background. Like this is really fun. I can tell you had a lot of fun with this one. So good job there. For the second image here, I really like this one. I think this one's really strong. This is a classic painted background line art character. This is a good way of working. This is kind of like, again, like the Ghibli way of working typically, where you have painted background line art character and it looks really good. And this image I think is really cool. Again, you were framing really well, where you have the character a bit of a darker value than the door, and then you've got some nice vignetting, which is adding to the depth, which is nice. So yeah, I think this is done very well. I like this image a lot. I think this is like the strongest visual image of the bunch, I'm pretty sure. And this one's nice too. This is like a nice intimate punch-in moment where, again, we have the characters having this romantic moment. He sort of has the flowers for her. If I were to look at these 3 illustrations in isolation, I think that I wouldn't necessarily understand the story. Because I saw your storyboard, I understand the story. But if I were just to look at these 3 in isolation, I think I would have a hard time understanding. One way you could increase understanding is if you had her chasing the butterfly in the first scene, and then maybe even putting like a butterfly symbol on the door, like it was leading her somewhere. It ties those 2 elements together. And the last shot, I think that it's, again, maybe a little bit disconnected. Like it doesn't necessarily feel super connected to these themes or these images, because like she's just kind of in the forest and all of a sudden there's like a guy here, you know? But I like the butterfly on the lapel. So the emphasis here is nice. And I guess that is tying it in, like it was leading her to him, I suppose, which is kind of cool. You could put a little bit more surprise on her face though, maybe a little bit more like purpose on his face. He's like, yes, I've led you here. And she's like, who the heck are you? But she's kind of happy about it a little bit. Those are some things you could explore here. But yeah, I like the 3-shot sequence. It's looking really good. So let's take a look at your comic here. So here's the layout for your comic. And then I know you did a value pass and then also a color pass where you were exploring some kind of very monochromatic, simple colors, which is cool. Yeah, all right, this is what I'm talking about. Yeah, this shot right here is where it's at. This is a nice one. So yeah, okay, cool. So let's hop back to just the line art just so we can get a read of what's going on. So characters kind of daydreaming, and then all of a sudden they look up and you hear a click, 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 you know, clink, clink, clink. This is nice. I like this a lot. This is really good. The key over the door is a nice touch. It's a nice overlap. I like it. And then the shot of her walking towards the butterfly is nice too. You could consider doing a line of action potentially where, you know, you could show that they're flying around. You could do like a little spiral or something. It's like kind of a classic thing that butterflies do. You could do something like that to add some motion and some rhythm. I think also with the first sequence here, I like this here. I think this should almost maybe have a little bit more space on the page, but this one here, I think that you could just punch it on the face and just have the exclamation mark and expression. I don't think you need the whole context here. Like this shot is kind of telling that story a little bit of the state of the room or the state of what's going on. Also, it might be that you want to just cut this here and have another panel here, but you could continue this diagonal panel and you could have one that's this big. So we can kind of ease into the transition of maybe she's leaving her door a little bit more close up. Then you go to the wide, and that might make a little bit more sense, just having a little bit more of a transition between these two frames. For this one, I like how you're thinking in terms of creating natural paneling. The only critique I have really is just the size of like emphasis. So like, I think that this one could be a little bit bigger, and I think this one could be maybe a little bit smaller even. And that'll help you separate the values too. I like the overlap here where it's coming over the page, but I think also this one should be overlapping both, because this is kind of the next shot in the sequence. So it should feel like it's a little bit farther forward than this one, which is behind. So yeah, having multiple layers of that overlap is good though. Then if we move over here, she's still chasing the butterfly and it's leading her to this kind of door area, right? I think that you could, well, first of all, I think there needs to be a little bit of a reverse here in terms of some of the compositions. Yeah, I think the door being on this side and then the action being over here is nice, because remember, this is panel number 1, right? Because it's taking up everything. So we can do what we talked about before, where we have the butterfly landing on the door, and you can do that like rhythm line coming forward in space. And what you could do is have the character entering maybe from this spot here. The bottom section, I do want to keep this on this side as is. I think that's better how you have it. Yeah, just a little bit of a light restructure. It gives you a lot more space on the page. It also creates clarity where maybe there's a little bit of confusion. So what you could do is like, you could have some kind of bushes in the foreground here, and the character could be like pushing through or like coming through them, like you're looking at them from behind. Something like that could be a strong like visual tie. Yeah, line weight is going to be another thing that rescues a lot of the clarity here. Like line weight helps so much with clarity. So for instance, the areas of overlap, the line weight is going to be what helps you with this stuff. Having the butterfly separated from the background, the line weight is going to be the thing that's going to really do it. Same with the character, like having good silhouette around the character is really important for legibility. There's a little bit of I think like a crunch of detail in some of these, like some of it is a little bit busy and could be simplified down, because when you're doing a page, you got to kind of simplify certain things down so that it's just more clearly legible, and it takes time to kind of like build that skill and develop that temperament of like what to emphasize with better line weight and what to kind of leave as is. So we've restructured a little bit. I think it would take some time to tinker with this to kind of get it looking really clear. I don't think there was anything hugely problematic with your original composition. I think it was really fun, and I think it's like working. You can just try some cool sequencing changes to see what that does for your composition, and kind of like maybe you could even put her walking towards the door. But then let's look at your value pass and your color pass. So what I like is the hues that you're choosing are really interesting. I like the hues that you're kind of choosing for this, and kind of how you're separating the character as like a pink element and other areas of blue element, like the more magical dreamlike thing being blue and her being pink, and the normal world being more of like a sepia kind of vibe. But in terms of the values and kind of structuring things, breaking things down, I think within the panels, you've got some good structure in terms of the value, right? Like you've got some good delineation and separation, which is nice. I think that it's just when we get to the areas of kind of greenery, the shapes and the kind of silhouettes and stuff like really disappear, especially in areas like this, like the area where you have the foliage and the door and everything. If you were to be a little bit more decisive with some of those elements, because it's all kind of like the same value you have here. Yeah, if I were to just like cut out some of these shapes that you have and just darken some of these elements just a little bit, just like a stronger delineation between the foliage and the greenery, and having things that are in the foreground a little bit darker as well can help to create that sense of depth and separation. Even just doing something like that, you can see how much it impacts the sense of silhouette and form and everything else. Like it creates a really, really strong effect on the viewer, which is nice. And then it allows your door to actually be more of a distinct object. But yeah, practicing values and just blocking in values is really great to do, and to kind of make a little bit of a priority oftentimes, because it can oftentimes like make or break a whole project, you know? When you use values to craft your visual experience, like for instance here, I'm starting to like have less of a problem with some of the layout stuff just as we continue to block things out with value as I had before. So I think like your page layout is good. You just need a little bit more clarity in some of the value structure stuff. For composition and for this kind of thing, painting, I would always prioritize value over color. I think like value is the most important thing with these works and projects. But in terms of layout, yeah, when I squint, like even with some of the changes I made, but even removing those changes, when I squint, I have like no idea what's going on. So I think like that's just the only thing that I would really change or affect. Also with backgrounds, you want to have somewhat of a distinct value between the background and the rest of the composition. So like something like this, I think you'd actually want it to be lighter than you think. Yeah, either lighter than you think or potentially darker than you think. But again, like the graphic read now is so much stronger and you're able to focus on what's happening in the panels a lot more. So we could do that version, or we could potentially even darken it so it was darker, but that adds a lot of kind of like mood and drama that maybe we don't want. I think the lighter one kind of worked really well. So again, like the value read is just so much stronger here. And if we kind of flick back and forth, you can see just how much it helps the paneling. Yeah, something worth considering, just how important value is for like the graphic read of stuff. But yeah, dude, this is great. I love the drawing. The drawing is fun. The character's looking good. The interaction's great here. And yeah, I love this one of him kind of coming through the door. I think you could push this maybe a bit more. I think like you could have him be a little bit bigger on the page maybe. And yeah, kind of like push that element. That could be really good for sure. So yeah, I really like some of the elements here. They're feeling really good. For this one, this sequence here, I think the side view is potentially not working as well as in the storyboard because we're looking at the door here, right? Like I think if you had it head on, it would be a better read. So if you're looking at the doorknob and the butterfly on the thing as it disappears through, I think it would be better. Yeah, the order of operations here, the order of action is maybe a little bit confusing, but again, it's like, you know, you're being super abstract with the paneling and stuff. So I think it's gonna happen sometimes that things are a little bit confusing. But I do like how creative you're being and how you're really trying stuff out. So really great job, CJ. But really great work. Snaps for CJ, guys.
For the last assignment, Gabriel tasked us to create an impactful illustration. Honestly, I was a bit intimidated by this assignment since my previous assignments had a lot of parts to them and required me to make a lot of art, although this assignment only required me to create one painting. For this final illustration, I decided to paint a scene in the Bible where a woman comes to Jesus and pours perfume on his feet. I saw it as a beautiful and intimate scene and wanted to recreate it. If you want to know more about the in-depth process behind this painting, check out my sketchbook tour where I create the composition and prep work before starting the illustration. Without further ado, let's check out the final feedback session.
This final week was all about resolving and using all the skills that we've gathered so far. So this one here is a very biblical illustration, focusing on a very tender moment where someone is washing the feet of, I'm assuming this is Jesus here. And there's a very, very clear moment of emotion. And overall, there's this really nice sweeping composition to this one. So this one feels very much like almost like a tableau. And I like that there's a lot of motion going on. There's some really great moments here. So, you know, it's interesting because, you know, you might ask like, well, how do you critique a piece like this, or, you know, what goes on? And I think that what I would say first for a piece like this is that you have many elements here that are kind of part of the same composition, but also creating separations and differences, all of that good stuff, which is really fun. The first thing that I do is I would check values. So if I would go to the kind of like black and white of a piece like this, the areas of greatest darkness are under the primary subject here and then off to the left here. So I've noticed that you like to vignette a little bit, like kind of add some darkness vignette or some blur vignette, which can be very powerful, but you do want to use effects like those sparingly, oftentimes, and with great purpose. Additionally, I think we can maybe work on bringing a little bit more depth to where we want depth and a little bit more brightness where we want brightness. So I think that if I were to select out this area and maybe just bring a little bit more of this lightness of the hair kind of into this area, just like a little bit more of it, because going so dark, it creates this really big dark area that is really pulling the eye. Whereas we could focus on creating a bit more dimensionality. You could even do a bit of a cast shadow here of the body kind of going down. And then off to the side, I really like all the textures you've worked in over here. I love this area in the back. I feel like it's just maybe a hint too dark, just like a hint. not even that far off in my opinion. Like I think it's just a slight tinge too dark. Just bring it up a little bit. And then when we zoom out, you can kind of see that it's helping to bring a lot more focus to the center. So when you have big areas of darkness, it really pulls the eye, especially when it's not uniform across the image. So even just a small change like that makes a really big effect. So then there's another element to consider here, which is that oftentimes, specifically in religious, specifically biblical imagery, characters oftentimes have vignettes around their head as like a sign of holiness or nobility or like a saintly vibe. And that oftentimes looks like a golden kind of halo around the character, something, you know, that's very, very round, you know, and circular, and, you know, it has a pretty big graphic effect on a piece. And I see, you know, with the brushstrokes that you're doing, what's cool is that you're kind of going in a circular pattern around the character. But since it's a biblical image, I'm almost kind of thinking like, you know, because it's so dark and it's kind of going around, the kind of symbolism here, it's almost making me feel like this character is like very much shrouded in darkness, which very much could be the narrative here. Like this character is kind of stuck in darkness and they're achieving, you know, salvation through this act of service, you know? So there's an element here that's definitely could be purposely thematic. I don't know if that was your intended purpose, but it's something that's interesting that's happening here, like again, as a byproduct of that preconceived knowledge that I had before. Yeah, do you want to touch on that, CJ, at all?
Yeah, because that was actually the exact point that I wanted to get across. Because the verse that I was going by is that they mentioned her as a sinful woman, and then she anointed his feet with oil. And you know, this act of service that you touched on, and then it was through that showing of faith and love that he like healed her, and that's why I added so much texture on the side where she's like weeping and mourning, and like that darkness, I wanted that to symbolize like the sin that she felt like suffocated by. And then that's why on the other side that she's like crying and she's like happy, that's why there's not so much of that texture that's on her, you know.
So there is actually like an elevation. I mean, what you could even do in that same way is you could think about, you know, like on this side, like you could have something in a similar way but maybe a bit lighter. Like you could try something like that. I don't know if that's like technically out of bounds for what you're allowed to depict, but it's, you know, it's something to consider, that maybe you could even have the opposite of what you have over here. But yeah, I think technically speaking, the values I think are some of the biggest areas to improve on here, just in those couple of areas, but then also in some of the other areas too. So another thing is compositionally is if I were to block this out, I would say like this is a really tight composition here. You know, you have your very spiral-like composition. All these elements are kind of moving around. There's a very clear narrative here. And this bit on the right potentially feels almost a little bit, I guess, like tacked on in terms of how it feels, because everything's kind of maybe competing across the same plane of focus. So I think compositionally, maybe there could be a little bit of adaptation there, a little bit of experimentation, which I actually want to transition into the thumbnails that you did here, because the thumbnails I thought were really good. Yeah, so something like this I think is really, really good. So here I see you're thinking things out traditionally, right? So you have the pot here, the crying face, washing the feet, face over here, and the character here, which is nice. So I see you're even blocking out where you want your values here, midpoints, darker points, all of that stuff. So I see you're actually thinking through it here, and you're thinking through all of your idea. So that's good. It's good that you also had a checklist here for your finish as well. Like that's really good to kind of go through your process. That's good. So I think that what's so interesting is that this sketch that you did, the composition feels so strong. Like if I were to just like grab this and overlay it on top of your final piece, you can see how much you changed the proportion of things in your final versus what you had here in the original. So the spacing and the blocking here is actually really nice. And the oil coming down, hitting the feet, the kind of motion here, this being a very flat plane that really holds the composition together. It's a little bit lost here where it's at a bit more of a steeper angle. This character has become much larger and now is very much like facing a profile view instead of of what you had here, where they were almost isolated in and of themselves here, kind of alone. So I feel like there was so much meaning and really nice consideration in this composition, and I feel like some of those elements were a little bit lost in the final. So here you have a really soft expression of kind of joy, and I do like that you pushed it a bit more to be a little bit more emotional here. And I like the tension in the eyebrows that you had and all of that stuff. But there is something to be said about the kind of sweetness of this image. I feel like if you combined elements of the gesture of where the head is turning, like it's really nice compositionally how it's kind of turning 3/4 down to the side, you know, it's like really kind of moving the composition in a cool way. And so, yeah, I think like maybe you could turn the head a little bit more and maybe work on the mouth a little bit so it has a little bit more of that sweetness to it. But that's like a narrative decision, and that's also kind of a little bit up to taste as well. But I do think that the proportion of things changing definitely changes the kind of the composition and the feel and how things feel. So I think this is like a really strong layout. And I think that the final outcome didn't necessarily capture the kind of essence of the original composition in terms of like the compositional appeal. But I think that the final outcome you have here is really nice. You know, your textures are looking nice. I think you're balancing your textures really well. Your values, like aside from the initial darkness stuff, you know, like I think the values are looking pretty good. I think that with the lighting, because the lighting is so important in biblical imagery, maybe looking at some Caravaggio, some Leonardo da Vinci paintings could really help you design the light around these pieces. That could really help a lot. And the last thing I'll say, which is just a technical thing, is the proportion. So I think just the arm ratio to the head, like I think this head is just a little bit big in comparison to the arm. So you can just reduce this so it's more in proportion. But yeah, so I think like the proportion of the body there was a little bit off. But yeah, I kind of miss a little of the compositional impact that some of this stuff has. Also, like I think that when you're blocking things out and you're considering things like to be something more graphic in the background or something in the foreground, I like that you're thinking about the value groupings, that this is kind of a bunch of lighter values, this is a bunch of darker values. But what I would do is I wouldn't necessarily default to blowing things out with the haze if you're just trying to do a separation of value rather than a separation of depth, because I think that this area here, it's a little too close to the background. It doesn't have enough kind of graphic power, because I think it was, again, like a little bit leaning on the airbrush there. You know, if we cut this out and have a little bit more of a better value differential, you can see it already has so much more of a compositional impact than what it had before. That kind of knowledge is going to come with time, a lot of practice, but I'm really liking how you're approaching this. I think you had a really creative approach. It was a really ambitious composition, so I think you got really far with it, which is fantastic. And yeah, I think that like the essence here is so good. I think try and figure out like what led your decision making to make so many changes, and when you're making those changes, checking in like, is it actually working? What about this was working so well that maybe we're losing here? You know, it can be really hard to constantly check in and out, and sometimes our capacity to finish is not quite aligned with our capacity to like ideate. So yeah, maybe you take a look at that. But I think even your, you know, overpaint looked really great. Like this looks really great. Maybe a little too dark in a couple areas, and then some proportion stuff and some composition stuff. But I like what you're doing with the narrative, and I like the overall theme of the piece, how you're going through this transition, and there's this really nice tableau narrative. Like, you know, notice how I haven't critiqued the idea. So I really think the idea is strong. So well done, CJ. Let's take a look at a couple other things that you're working on. So here I see you were trying out a few other compositions as well. Again, like I really like the shapes that you're using here to really graphically block stuff out. Really pay attention to that. Like when you're sketching in this way, like what's going on here that you're not bringing into your final process. It could just be that the tools you're using digitally maybe aren't in alignment with, you know, how you're thinking in paper. So, and then I know you did some Notan studies. These are looking great. So for those of you who don't know, Notan is essentially approaching studies in just black and just white. So separating things in just their block values. And I see you're taking that very seriously, communicating a lot of texture, getting in those big shapes, also doing portraits. These are looking good. Yeah, very strong. I think these stylistically are really, really nice. So these just look like they have a nice sense of appeal. So I would post these on the internet. These look really nice. These would do well on social media. And then yeah, nice studies here that you're just trying out some block out stuff, some practice. This is cool. Always just kind of continue doing this stuff and everything. And yeah, these are looking good. Maybe just watch this hip here. Think about the spine and where this hip would need to be in relation with the spine, that it would be at this angle. It would probably be a little bit more back on the body slightly. But yeah, these are looking great. I think your technical drawing skills are improving pretty quick, which is nice. Yeah, well done, CJ. Really like this outcome. And yeah, really proud of your development, man. This is really strong. So I think if you just keep going, you're just going to keep getting better and better and better. And I'm really impressed. So well done, CJ.
I truly learned so much under his mentorship and guidance. Working with Gabriel was an amazing journey that I definitely won't forget. If you want to learn more about Gabriel, I'll include all his socials in the description below. I hope you guys enjoyed this video and found it educational. Don't forget to check out my commissions if you're interested. Simply email me at cjstarlight1c29@gmail.com about any ideas you want me to draw. You can also find my email in the description below. Have a blessed day or night, and I will see you all again in my next video.